Archaeologists Explore Early America by Stephanie Segu. When an archaeologist begins to study a group of people, he or she hopes to answer certain questions. When and where did these people live? What can we learn about how they lived? What kinds of things did they leave behind? Scientists know that people lived in North America for many centuries before the arrival of Europeans. These American Indians, or Native Americans, inhabited each region of the continent, from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast and from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. The varied natural resources of each region had a significant influence on how these groups lived. Our understanding of how American Indians lived long ago comes from the work of archaeologists as well as the knowledge passed on to American Indians today. American Indians of the Eastern Woodlands. The name Iroquois refers to the members of several American Indian groups that include the Mohawk, the Seneca, the Onondaga, the Oneida, and the Cayuga. Each was a group living in the forested regions of the eastern woodlands. Like many other American Indian groups, the Iroquois relied heavily on available natural resources. For example, they used wood from the abundant hardwood trees, such as maple, elm, and ash, to build their villages, homes, and some tools. The Iroquois were farmers who usually constructed their villages on high ground so that they could more easily protect themselves against attacks. A tall fence of spiked logs served as a means of protection. The Iroquois also built lookouts from which villagers could watch for approaching enemies. Within each village, the Iroquois built longhouses. A longhouse had living space and places for storing things. Each was approximately 20 feet wide and between 75 to 120 feet long. The frame was constructed from wooden poles and covered with tree bark. Many different families could live in a single longhouse, and if necessary, the dwelling could be extended to house more families. Each family had its own living space with dividers that separated them from other families and raised platforms for sleeping and storage. Cooking fires were placed in a center aisle. In what is the present-day southeastern United States, American Indians lived in villages that had three common features. One feature was a circular meeting house with a domed room where the town leaders met. Another feature was a central town square, or stomp ground, for religious or political ceremonies. Still another feature was a large court on which ball games were played. Family homes were usually built around the village border. The Creek, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, and the Cherokee all lived in what is the present-day southeastern United States. These groups built plain, rectangular dwellings. Their houses were wooden constructions, and each dwelling had a sloped roof made from grass-like plants or straw. Originally part of the Creek, the Seminole inhabited Florida where it was hot, humid, and swampy. Some Seminole lived in Chickees. These small dwellings had thatched roofs and open sides and were built on platforms to avoid flooding during heavy rains. The Seminole hung cotton fabric from the beams of their homes to help keep out rain and insects. American Indians of the Great Plains. The Great Plains of the western and central United States were home to many different groups of American Indians. Some American Indian groups of the Great Plains lived in permanent villages and farmed, but moved from place to place during buffalo hunting season. Among these groups were the Pawnee, the Omaha, and the Osage, who lived in earth lodges. These lodges were square, with a floor built below ground level. Wooden poles were used for the walls and roof, which were covered with woven grass and a covering of earth. An opening, or smoke hole, was left in the roof's center. The Mandan and the Hidatsa lived in villages along the upper Missouri River in North Dakota. They built earth lodges near the river and winter lodges closer to the forests, which supplied them with wood for fires. Each earth lodge had a dome shape, was between 40 and 60 feet wide, and about 15 feet high. These lodges had a roof made of wooden rafters covered with willows, grass, and sod. Inside, animal hides separated the sleeping quarters from the rest of the living space. A family kept all of its belongings inside the home, including their dogs and horses. Horses were kept inside so they would not be stolen. Most American Indian groups of the Great Plains were not sedentary or stayed in one place. They were nomadic people who hunted buffalo and followed the herds that moved across the region. Because these people were always on the move, they needed lodging that was portable. Among the many nomadic groups who lived in the Great Plains were the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Comanche, the Blackfoot, the Crow, and the Arapaho. The nomadic groups of the Great Plains designed a dwelling that could be taken down easily, packed up, carried away, and rebuilt. This was the teepee, with a cone-shaped frame made from long, tall wooden poles. The poles were tied together at the top. A teepee was covered with buffalo hides, which were replaced once a year. Teepees started off small enough for trained dogs to help carry the poles and hides when a group moved. After the groups of the Great Plains began to use horses, however, their teepees became larger. With horses, they could move their teepees and other belongings more easily. American Indians of the Desert Southwest. American Indians of the Desert Southwest built a variety of dwellings. The early Mogollon and the Hohokam people built pit houses that were partially underground. Each house was rectangular with wooden poles that leaned inward to support a roof. This method of building created inward-sloping walls. People covered the roof and walls with branches and grass topped with a thick layer of adobe mud. American Indian cliff dwellings and pueblos are two of the most remarkable finds made by archaeologists in the desert Southwest. Cliff dwellings were found in an area called Mesa Verde, which is located in the Four Corners region of the United States. This is where the present-day borders of Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona meet. These amazing structures, built by an ancient group known as the Anasazi, are located below a mesa set among steep cliffs. Some of the buildings are small and housed only a few families. Others are much larger, apartment-like buildings that were inhabited by as many as 250 people. Later, the Anasazi left the Four Corners region, probably because of drought, building new communities farther south. The people who moved there built pueblos containing rooms stacked one on top of another. Each higher story is set back from the one below. A series of ladders made it possible for people to move among the dwellings. Some huge pueblos, called great houses, have hundreds of rooms and underground chambers. Some of the largest and most famous examples are located in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. One great house, Pueblo Bonito, has about 800 rooms. These structures were large enough to house as many as 3,000 people, though archaeologists believe that fewer people actually live there. Art and artifacts. Archaeologists are interested in more than just dwellings. They also look for artifacts, such as tools, weapons, clothing, pottery, baskets, and decorative items, anything that can help them learn more about a culture. Tools and weapons can tell scientists how people hunted for food. From the size and weight of a weapon, experts can tell how hunters used it. Before Europeans arrived in North America, American Indian women of the eastern woodlands made clothing from animal skins. They also decorated clothing with porcupine quills, which they often dyed before sewing onto a garment. When Europeans moved westward, they brought new materials including glass beads with them. American Indian women began to use fancy beadwork to decorate their clothing. Many American Indians were, and still are, expert potters, basket makers, carvers, and weavers. Scientists can date some of the American Indian pottery found by archaeologists back to prehistoric times. Much of the pottery is decorated with elaborate geometric designs. Archaeologists have also found many bowls decorated with animals, such as birds, frogs, and snakes. The basket work of the Chumash and the Pomo groups is especially detailed. These baskets are intricately woven and come in a variety of shapes and sizes. The workmanship is so skillful that the natural fibers are interwoven to create highly complicated designs. The American Indians of the Pacific Northwest carved wooden totem poles to tell the story of a family tree. For example, a family might claim a relationship with a particular noble animal, so that animal would be represented on the family's totem pole. Some totem poles are 40 feet high. Beautiful and colorful blankets woven by expert Navajo women are highly prized, especially large chief's blankets. These works of art contain intricate patterns that may combine stripes, zigzags, and diamond shapes. The Navajo today are also known for making silver jewelry inlaid with turquoise. They sometimes even create silver jewelry to decorate their horses. Today, many of the special objects made by American Indians are prized possessions of individuals and museums around the world. The National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. contains more than 800,000 works of art. The pieces are from North and South America and span a period of 10,000 years. These artifacts, along with the knowledge passed on to American Indians today, have helped us to better understand how American Indians of long ago lived.